It just never ends. Action. Action Bronson.
Cool. So we're back. Another episode.
A new day, a new dollar.
Ooh, and we should mention we just talked to the
SCCA guy.
SCCA member guy that runs the DC portion, which is where we are. Or we're not in DC, but that's our local one. And for the time trial stuff, so we now have a plan of everything we do. He said it's possible for us to get our advanced licenses by the end of the year, which is needed for Super Lap Battle. So we're trying to get on track as soon as possible. We have our novice licenses, both of us. So we're good to go.
Novice boys for real.
So we're just trying to get on track ASAP. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting for some parts and some other stuff to show up, we're going to show you how to repair carbon fiber parts. And I'm gonna go over how to repair them for, this is an epoxy based part. Some are polyester based resin, 90% of them, that cheap boy stuff they be selling you. Like if it's a fiberglass part with a outer layer of like single layer of carbon fiber, most times they run it with like a really thick gel coat or really thick polyester
Resin
layer first, like a clear layer. Actually, I have a part that on my X5, some lady rear-ended me like in February, and I had a carbon diffuser that I'd bought that was crappy fiberglass and carbon fiber part, but it's for my daily, so I didn't really care. We can actually show you a cracked version of that type of part too. So this is your typical carbon fiber part. From the outside, if you look over here, it looks nice.
It's amazing. From the outside.
Shiny carbon fiber. See these like white fibers? That is fiberglass. And then if you see here, there's that thick gel coat I was telling you about. This thick, clear stuff. That's either thick polyester resin or gel coat. And I can tell it's polyester because epoxy parts actually have a lot more flex to them. They won't do the splintering and cracking and exploding stuff as much. Which there's a time and a place for this stuff, and it's not all bad. So I mean, if your carbon fiber part's made with polyester resin, it's not the worst thing in the world. But in almost every scenario, epoxy would be superior. But is it worth the difference? Sometimes it's not. Epoxy resin is a good bit more expensive. Even to try and keep it looking like it's full carbon fiber, looks like they've painted the back of it. Or sometimes even when there's a single carbon fiber sheet and you put a bunch of fiberglass parts or fiberglass layers, they're clear. So if the carbon sheet on the outside is actually thick enough and like doesn't have any spacing in the weave, you'll see it'll look like it's black in the back. But this you can tell, since it's been hit, all of these layers are all fiberglass, and there's your single layer of carbon fiber right there.
Dang.
No, actually, no, it's 2 layers of carbon fiber. At least over this section, but that might just be because there's that's only over this section. You can see there's like
you got that bump.
They set a separate piece of carbon here with this bump out, and then they have another carbon piece that overlaps the whole thing. That's the only reason there's 2 there. So literally these pieces of fiberglass have delaminated and ripped up. You can see underneath it, it's clear. So this is fiberglass. But most companies sell this. This is a carbon fiber part to them.
And they will give you that tax.
Yeah, and it's crazy. And they'll double or triple the price of a fiberglass part. And the only difference is one single sheet of carbon fiber. It's made the exact same way and everything, which I don't understand. But, oh well, we're not doing that. We just bought a scale that you can like attach to like one of our frame machines and stuff like that, and we're gonna do a strength test.
Just like how
combining like a polyester carbon fiber / fiberglass part, epoxy based carbon fiber part, and just maybe fiberglass, maybe metal, I don't know. We haven't fully figured it out, but that's the plan. So when you have a crack similar to this or this that I have here in the front layer of this, you can see that this has these really thick chunks of like clear stuff that we're talking about. So it's either gel coat, it's probably most likely gel coat, I would assume, with this type of part.
See how close I can get.
What you want to do to be able to get all of these cracks removed, or at least the vision of these cracks removed from the outside, we're going to try to brace the piece from the back half and remove the sight of all the cracks from the front.
So that same theory is what you're going to apply to...
Well, that's what I'm applying to this. We're not going to try to fix this piece because...
Yeah, that piece is boo-boo.
But what you would essentially... Any of these cracks that you're seeing here, see how it like looks like kind of like a white? Mm-hmm. That is air that's gotten in between the
I don't know if I'll be able to see on
two
camera,
sections.
but it's like a spider web type of thing.
Yeah, I mean any of these white sections here.
Oh yeah, like
any of these cracks you can see is basically air.
Very clearly.
So when possible, the best option is to try and crack away as much of that outer layer of either resin or gel coat first, and then you want to sand the area and then use a thin enough either epoxy or clear coat to get inside the actual cracks. Mm-hmm. So if you can get some liquid, clear liquid inside the cracks to harden, it'll remove the sight of the crack at least.
Because it'll fill in those voids, I'm guessing.
Yeah. But the main thing you want to do is really brace the part, especially from the, well, what I'm really going to do is brace most of it from the back, just to keep it super strong. Mm-hmm. You could also just add another layer of carbon on top of it.
I guess the bracings were going to help you from re-stressing it out?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually have a little crack here in the front too, and here, and that's from when I dropped it, and it basically just bent. But I was literally carrying it on my head, and then I don't remember what happened, but
took a tumble.
Yeah. I'm gonna brace this corner as well, even though that hasn't cracked, just to prevent any future stuff. So here, both corners, we're gonna do, and then we're gonna, you can see that there's air in between this corner right here. See that lighter spot? So what I'm gonna do is crack that away. Boom. You might use like a razor blade and really get in there, but I'm gonna crack as much of that away as possible, and then we're gonna sand the area, and then we're gonna fill all that with an epoxy. You wanna keep the resin base of the part. A lot of times, epoxy resins and polyester resins will not bond well. Mm-hmm. So if you can figure out what type of resin was used on your part, I would stick with that resin. There's some epoxy resins that can bond to polyester resins, and I think vice versa, but
it's better to just match it up.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Or if you're using something specific, make sure you read the guidelines. Like if you have any questions and you're using any fiberglass products, call them, make sure what you're using it for is correct, because you don't want to get all the way through there and then realize that your part's gonna like delaminate or the layers will pop.
Yeah.
So what we're gonna start with is we're gonna actually brace the back first. What we do is we're gonna flip it, sand the areas that are affected, and then we have a carbon fiber little strand cutoffs, like little bits, and we're gonna mix that with some resin to basically make like a big paste. And we're gonna paste that into the corners and really just add some strength.
Okay.
So I'm gonna start by sanding the inside of the spots that I'm actually gonna apply the carbon paste, we're gonna call it. I'm gonna use a 40 grit because the deeper the scratch you can get in there, the better it'll bond. Whenever you have any like epoxy resin and you wanna put another layer on it, if you don't like scratch the surface after it's gotten past the tacky point, then you risk that new layer of resin you're putting on to, it could delaminate and pop off. We're gonna hit everything with some 40 grit, sand it all, and then we're gonna mix up I'm gonna use the System 2000 epoxy resin with the 20-minute hardener and a bunch of the chopped graphite powder stuff, graphite fibers, which is literally just like chopped carbon sections basically. We'll make a putty, and then I'm gonna glob it in these corners, throw it in here, in that corner as well. So this has all been sanded now. I'm gonna hit it with my blower to get all of the dust and stuff off, and then we're gonna hit it with the wax and grease remover that we use for paint prepping, just to keep any like hand or oils, or I'm not sure. This is the bottom of my hood. I don't know if I've gotten oil and stuff on it, to keep the adhesion really high. And then once we do that, we can start mixing the carbon paste stuff. Ready for bonding. If I had a table available, I could set this all up on. All right, so like I said, I'm using System 2000 with the 20-minute hardener, which is mixed in a ratio of 4:1. So I have this 4:1 stick. And then these are the number 571 chopped fibers.
So I wonder how they do like that chopped carbon fiber they talk about.
Yeah, so it's literally like a strand that they just cut straight.
Oh, okay.
And this is basically, when you buy a normal carbon sheet, it's basically these strands, but they're woven in whatever pattern you get. Get the, like a classic straight, whatever the style is, I don't even remember the name. The one that I don't use, or you use the twill, the 2x2 twill. Best looking carbon. They have a satin finish is one, octagon finishes, a 4x4 twill, which is actually pretty badass. It's like the same as 2x2 twill, but it's thicker, like wider spaces. There's so many. There's like camo carbon patterns. There's
that's what people have been talking about. Like, oh, you ever thought about doing color or camo?
So much stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of the camo ones are mixes of like an aramid fiber and carbon fiber, or like Kevlar and carbon fiber. But I'm gonna stick to that all natural.
And what'd you say the ratio was again?
4:1. This makes it a lot easier to mix compared to like doing it by weight and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not actually sure, it's my first time using these fibers. I'm not sure how much you should put in. Mix 1 part fibers to 15 parts epoxy resin. I'm gonna eyeball that. So I'm just mixing the hardener and the resin together first to make sure that's, and now we're gonna eyeball this 1 part to every 15 parts. That seems good. Let's see what happens when we mix this up.
It looks like venom.
It literally does.
The mixing got real. Well, I'm guessing that do make sense because it has to soak it up.
Yeah.
Damn,
wow.
what the hell?
That soaked up and it got a lot bigger. I have a spreader here, this little stick, and I also have a brush, but I think I'm gonna mostly use my hands.
Sometimes it's the best way.
Yeah. It's like finger painting. So make sure you get all the air bubbles out. Do you want to be mindful that the thickness of it, the thicker it gets, the hotter it's going to be. So the thicker you lay it on there, the faster it should harden. We'll see, but that should stay true when it's with.
Feels fairly warm right now.
It's a little warm. It's not too bad.
You think it's gonna get as hot, like smoking hot, or?
I mean, I guess technically if it was left together, I mean, it is less resin per surface area compared to just resin in a bucket by itself. So the carbon fiber will probably help it a little bit. It's fun experimenting.
That's what I say. It feels like I'm at a science fair project once again.
Yeah. Plus is the underside of my hood. I don't really care what it looks like. I just want it to be strong, boys and girls.
I'm guessing we would just trim down the edges.
Yeah, I probably will let that sit a little over it.
And now I see why you went with the 40 grit. Because you built up a nice amount of abrasion.
Yeah, for it to all hold.
Because you can see, like, if you did in that joint, it would definitely be slipping and sliding.
Yeah, you just don't want it to pop. And especially right here, where that crack was, this will actually flex a little more.
Meat sweats. Action.
So all of this is tacked up, but it's really stiff. So that's exactly what we wanted. Now from the outside on this corner that has a crack and the front that has a little crack, we're gonna do a similar thing. So what we're gonna do is we're going to, obviously all this overhang I'm gonna cut off later. But for these small cracks and stuff like that, it looks like some of that resin actually even pushed through the back end, which is good. So we're gonna sand some of this away. I'm gonna start with 80 grit, then work my way down to 120 and then 180. And then at 180, we'll leave it and put the, actually no, I'm gonna leave it at 120. So at 120, then we'll leave it and we'll dab in some epoxy. And I did want to mention, one of our subscribers mentioned this forever ago. And I finally took the time to
Take up on his tip.
listen. But if you buy these real shit brushes, they're just so cheap. You can buy like I think like a 20 pack of them on Amazon for like a couple bucks. And you take super glue and you run along the base. It'll literally absorb into it. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll get no hairs.
Damn, Deathstroke. I'm not gonna be able to comment no more. No hairs.
So I actually got like 2 tubes of this, and I went through and like the past like 10 brushes I've used have all been glued at the base. We'll just give this a minute to dry. The System 2000 epoxy is really nice because I think it's the strongest room temperature epoxy resin that they carry. Well, I'm not sure how the strength compares to the System 4500 because that's their infusion stuff, so that's thinner. But for what we're trying to do, we're trying to build it up. So the System 2000 is perfect. So yeah, we're gonna get right to it. I'm gonna use a block, a little straight block, and some 80 grit. And once you start to see that you're getting to the actual fibers, you don't want to sand into your carbon fiber fibers because it'll actually, it could deteriorate the actual, that layer in general. You could basically sand through it. So if you start seeing the fibers, that's when you want to stop. But sections next to it, I can go a little farther. And especially where you have the crack, you want to see if you can feather it out, get as deep as you can in there.
I'm guessing that's why you're using such a heavy grit.
Yeah, it'll cut. So the lower the grit you use, think of it as like cooking with or like chopping up something with like a knife. The sharper the blade, the nicer the cut will actually be. So the coarser the grit, the straighter your sands. Like you'll actually, if you're blocking something with 80 grit versus blocking with like 320 grit, 320 grit is going to give you a wavier surface at the end versus the 80 because the 80 will cut faster. It'll cut all the high spots first. But plus, since we're just putting epoxy on this. Epoxy, I could actually even leave it in 80 grit. Epoxy will grab onto the 80 grit and it'll hide all those scratches. And then once you clear it later, then you can clear right on top of 80 grit scratches. It'll hide all of this.
So when you put the resin in, are you gonna like just dab it in, I guess, with that brush? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Yep. So you want to make sure you build it up as thick as you can. So you're basically using it as like a filler.
Okay.
If you're using body filler, but it's very, very thin.
Okay.
If you don't lay it in as thick as you possibly can, then you'll have to do multiple layers. But so what we're going to do is we're going to put this layer on. There might be a possibility of some of like the deeper cavities that I might need 2 layers of resin, but we're not going to bore you guys with just multiple days of, oh, it dried, sand it, more epoxy, oh, it dried.
Yeah.
So we'll just go over all the steps and then we'll show you later what it looks like at the end. Cool. Well, it's probably as heavy as I can lay it on there for a first layer. So we're going to let this dry, cut it down with about 80 grit. If there's any low spots, hit it again. Same thing, let it dry, cut it down with 80 grit. As soon as it's perfect, then you're ready to just pretty much, you can go up in grit from there, from 80 to 120, 120 to 180, maybe even finish it all the way up to like 320 and then clear it. And it'll look good as new.
So this is going to be the ending of part 1.
Yeah, because there's no use waiting a couple days to show you guys this.
Yeah.
So we'll recap in the next one.